So if you've been told you need to activate your core when you pick something up off the ground, that's good advice, but only if you know this one key detail that can make or break your core. And of course, before we get going, please subscribe to Riley Rehab. I'm coming up with regular content all the time, ultimately helping you become the expert of your own body. And today what we're doing is we're talking about the core. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, there's a muscle called the transverse abdominis, which is often referred to as the core by many people. And how it works is it's basically like a belt that goes around your back and all the way around your waist like this. So you basically have this internal belt in your body that can just keep everything tight. And the whole idea with that is the more you keep the back tight, whenever you bend up to pick something off the ground, then the less your back has to do work, and ultimately the stronger you can become at lifting things. However, a lot of people don't explain why this works, and I'm going to show you guys right here. In order for the core to work, it relies on the air in your tummy. So if you imagine this balloon as the air that you have in your tummy, you take this belt and it goes all the way around your tummy, just like this. And basically, the harder your core contracts, the more you're going to kind of squeeze back and your tummy's going to go in. And the big effects from this, I'm going to take the belt off just so you can see, is that the air in your tummy will push against your spine right here. So that and the muscles will kind of contract together to squeeze all the bones of the low back together. And ultimately, this creates more stability, which is very important if you have any kind of back problem. It's also good because when you have that air, you also get some of the air in here to push up, kind of into the ribs here. And that stops the ribs from dropping down and also stops the pelvis from curling up. Now, practically what this means is your ribs aren't going to drop down as much when you lift something up, so you're not going to have that bad posture because you're going to be full of air, and it's going to keep the ribs nice and high and keep the back in a good position. And lastly, the more you have the pressure pushing up against the ribs, the less the muscles of your back right here have to work. So if you are going through a back injury, this can be a game changer. Now, when people teach core activation, the usual thing you hear is you try to draw your belly button inwards. So you basically try to make your belly button go in like that. And while that is the correct way to activate it, a lot of people think it's all about just getting as skinny as possible. You just make yourself as skinny as you possibly can get yourself, and that will be ultimate activation of your core. Now, while this might be a good strategy if you're picking up a frisbee on the beach and you see some attractive person walk by, it's ultimately not going to be the most efficient thing to protect your spine. And I'll show you why. Because if you have no air, imagine this much air inside your tummy at any given time, you're not going to have anything to hold up the ribs, anything to keep everything in place. And no matter how hard you squeeze it, it's going to be as if you're driving on a flat tire. Sure, it's going to be better than driving on no tire at all, but even if you're pinching really, really hard, you're not getting as much stability as you would have got if you had more air in the tank. Now, on the other extreme, some people will hold their breath and take as much air in their tummy as possible. And this is something you often see when people do powerlifting, strongman, those kind of things. Something like that. And how this would look in practice is it would be like having a big full thing of air right here. And you imagine that belt around, just kind of squeezing it in like that. You are going to get the most support possible on this. You're going to hold your ribs up. You're probably going to be able to lift more weight than you normally could. So it is the ultimate use of your core for efficiency. However, the downside with this is that you're putting so much pressure on the system. And ultimately, if you have any kind of loose ends, anything you're worried that might pop, for example, a hernia or any kind of abdominal wall issue, this is the most highest risk thing you can do for that. And that's something you need to keep in mind. Now, for the majority of people, this is probably not going to be so much of a risk that I would say never do it. However, since this is a rehab channel and I know many of my followers are struggling with abdominal wall issues, if you are having any doubts or any fear that you might get a hernia or something like that, the best bet is to not rely on overinflating the tummy all the way. What usually works the best is a happy medium, where you just have just enough air to keep the ribs up, and then your core can squeeze that and hold your back nice and stiff, nice and steady together. Now, in practice, how this would work is if you're already used to the whole idea of sucking your tummy in to activate your core, what I want you to do is, instead of focusing on how skinny you can get, try to focus on turning the core on, so you still feel stiff when you basically feel right here in the muscles along, basically slightly below the belly button right here. But at the same time, you don't feel it going inwards all the way. And also too, you want to try to maintain a little bit of air down here. So I want you to just breathe normally. And then try to maintain a tummy that doesn't go in or out. It just stays at about the same length it would normally at rest. Maybe 1 inch wider. If you were to check your waistline, it should be maybe an inch wider. You can play with this. More air is going to give you more support for your back. However, there is a trade-off that the more air you have, similar to if you were to inflate your tires like crazy, the higher risk you have of having any sort of problem on the abdominal wall. I should also note that regardless of how much you inflate your tummy, if your goal is to play it safe, you're better off not holding your breath while you're lifting things up off the ground. That means maintain a constant stream of either inward breathing or outward breathing. No breath holding, no should ever happen. So I hope this helps. If you like this, please subscribe to Riley Rehab. I'm going to come up with new content like this every week, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.